Fire, flood, storm and cyclone, applying science to the challenge. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 2020 Laurie Hammond Oration. My name is Katherine Woodthorpe. I'm the chair of the Bushfire and Natural Hazards Cooperative Research Centre and your host today. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands on which we're all joining the meeting today. I'm on Camaragal land myself, and I'd like to pay my respects to all First Nations peoples, to their elders past, present and emerging. The tragic and destructive bushfires of the 2019-2020 Black Summer across southeastern Australia posed a range of challenges for the nation's scientists. In the face of the combined forces of nature, climate, demographics and limited resources, can science make a real difference? What sort of research do we need now to prepare us for the natural hazard impacts of tomorrow? The value of research in solving such national problems is the focus of today's Laurie Hammond Oration, to be delivered by Australia's Chief Scientist, Dr Alan Finkel. This talk, Fire, Flood, Storm and Cyclone, Applying Science to the Challenge, is presented by the Bushfire and Natural Hazards Cooperative Research Centre as part of National Science Week. Most of you are probably familiar with the CRC, but there's also many on this webinar that might not know us so well. This Cooperative Research Centre into Bushfire and Natural Hazards was founded in 2013 and also builds on the success of the former Bushfire CRC. It comprises a collaborative arrangement of partners from both the research community and the users of that research, such as emergency response agencies, land managers, the Bureau of Meteorology and many others. Our funding term ends in June next year, and the Commonwealth Government announced recently a commitment to $88 million for a new research centre to improve how we prepare for, respond to and recover from bushfires, floods, cyclones, storms and other hazards. The new centre will build on the foundations laid by the CRC over the last 8 years. The joint statement from the Honourable David Littleproud MP, Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management, and the Honourable Karen Andrews MP, Minister for Industry, Science and Technology, said that the funding will support the transition of the current Bushfire and Natural Hazards CRC to a new world-class research centre for natural hazard resilience and disaster risk reduction. We welcome this funding and the initiative in setting up a new research centre in the sector, and we're working with the Commonwealth Government to develop the research agenda that the centre will tackle. So, stay tuned for opportunities to interact with the new centre as we get underway. Now to the purpose of getting together today. This annual oration is held in honour of the former chairman of the CRC, the late Dr Laurie Hammond. Laurie was appointed as independent chair of the CRC when it began in 2013 and was integral to the growth and development of the centre. His leadership at the board level and his strategic advice to management was always insightful, timely and welcomed. Laurie was also a friend of mine, and we worked together on many committees and boards over many years. He was a great colleague to have and a great friend. I'd like to think that he'd be pleased that I picked up the baton from him. Laurie passed away in late 2018 and is sadly missed by all of us here at the CRC and by his colleagues across the emergency services and management sector and the broader science community. Our thoughts are with his wife, Katherine, and family who are watching today. Hello, Katherine. I hope you're well. This annual Laurie Hammond Oration was originally scheduled as a key part of the COVID-cancelled AFAC 20 annual conference in Adelaide in August. The AFAC conference would have normally been the major knowledge and networking event for researchers, staff and volunteers in emergency management in Australia and New Zealand. We welcome all of those people to today's talk, and we also welcome many in the audience today who we've not met before. With the restrictions brought on by the COVID-19 virus, we've decided to proceed with the oration as a free public online event as part of National Science Week. Dr. Finkel's talk today on the use of science to address the real-world issues in natural hazards is a fitting legacy to Dr. Hammond's belief in the importance of transferring science into practice. So to our speaker, he really needs no introduction, but you may not know all of his amazing background. I've known Alan for many years and in many guises, amongst those being as an entrepreneur and successful businessman, as president of the Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering, as the Chancellor of Monash University, and most recently as Australia's Chief Scientist. Dr. Finkel has an extensive science background as an entrepreneur, engineer, neuroscientist and educator. He did his PhD in electrical engineering at Monash University and worked as a postdoctoral research fellow in neuroscience at the Australian National University, and then left academia to found Axon Instruments, a global science and technology company based in the US. During this time, he invented a commercially successful device which substantially speeds up drug research. Alan became Australia's Chief Scientist in 2016, and his term concludes at the end of this year. As Chief Scientist, Dr. Finkel this year took the role of Chair of the Expert Advisory Panel for the CSIRO report on climate and disaster resilience, which I also served on. The report was commissioned by the Prime Minister following the tragic and destructive last bushfire season in southern Australia. His office has also developed a bushfire research and technologies capabilities paper to help us better understand the range and depth of capacity in bushfire research and its utilisation in Australia. The perspective of the Chief Scientist is a valuable contribution to the broader public discussion on how to respond to the recent fire season. The Royal Commission into National Natural Disaster Arrangements is underway, and several other important inquiries and reports at the national and state level will also be reporting soon. Science is only one of many aspects being considered by these inquiries, but it is a fundamental one. And finally, just before Alan speaks, some housekeeping. This talk is being recorded for later online access. As attendees, you'll receive an email when the video is available on our website in coming days. And also you'll receive a survey, and we'd be most grateful if you'd fill that out for us. So over to you, Dr. Finkel, on how science and research can be applied to address future impacts of natural hazards in Australian communities. Over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Katherine, for that warm introduction, and my warmest acknowledgement of the presence today of Laurie Hammond's wife, Katherine, and family. Let me begin by sharing a vivid description of one of our nation's worst bushfire disasters. The speed of the fires was appalling. Blown by a wind of great force, they roared as they travelled. Balls of crackling fire sped at a great pace in advance of the fires, consuming with a roaring, explosive noise all that they touched. Houses of brick were seen and heard to leap into a roar of flame before the fires had reached them. This is a passage that speaks to us, but it was actually written more than 80 years ago, describing the Black Friday bushfires of 1939 that devoured some 2 million hectares of Victoria and claimed the lives of 71 people. The devastation was so shocking that it prompted a Royal Commission, a landmark bushfire inquiry in Australia. The Commission's report makes interesting reading for the highly vivid descriptions, as you can see in the quote with which I began my speech, and for its brevity, at just 36 pages, it is a lesson in conciseness. It is also instructive. Its findings shifted the terms of the national debate and helped change the approach to fire management practices. As the Chief Executive of the CRC, who are hosting us today, Richard Thornton, said, that 1939 Royal Commission was the first real attempt to gain a deep understanding of the causes and consequences of a major bushfire. And this search for understanding, it continues unabated. And I'm particularly delighted to note in front of this audience that Mary O'Kane, who delivered the inaugural Laurie Hammond Oration last year, is chairing the New South Wales Bushfire Inquiry. As soon as I heard of Mary's appointment to co-lead the inquiry, I knew that she would do a fantastic job, as she did when she was a member of my panel for the 2017 review into the national electricity market. In the search for practical and effective solutions to bushfire and natural hazards, science and translational research are critically important. Because, as Laurie Hammond was so fond of saying, utilisation is everything. With that philosophy, it is no surprise that Laurie was a strong supporter of the CRC model and eagerly took up the position of inaugural chairman of the Bushfire and Natural Hazard CRC to guide management to their first successes. As we deal with the consequences of our devastating Black Summer, we have once again been prompted to examine Australia's ability to prevent, mitigate, and respond to natural disasters. But now we have the added overlay of climate change intensifying some of these disasters. This intensification is acknowledged at the highest levels. In January, in a major speech at the National Press Club, the Prime Minister acknowledged the need to take action to reduce global emissions to mitigate the risk of climate change. And he continued, it's not in dispute. Noting Australia's history of investing in the technology of resilience, the science of resilience, the Prime Minister announced that he had tasked the CSIRO to prepare a report on climate and disaster resilience to outline practical measures to protect our natural assets. And he asked me to chair an expert advisory panel to support that work, as Katherine mentioned in her introduction. The government's acknowledgement of the impact of climate change was captured in the very first sentence of the report's terms of reference. Just 4 words: Australia's climate is changing. Unequivocally, the government accepts this. Unequivocally, there are 2 areas we need to address: adaptation and mitigation. And I'm honoured to be engaged on both of them. Let's begin with adaptation. The CSIRO report on climate and disaster resilience will be reviewed in due course by National Cabinet. But in the meantime, it has been considered as evidence by the Bushfire Royal Commission, where I appeared as a witness 2 weeks ago. This CSIRO report considered the increasing challenges climate change is likely to throw at us over the next 20 years. And in the report, we focused on what I call acute disasters. These are like acute diseases, such as measles. They last a short time, they come on rapidly, and can be accompanied by horrific symptoms. Acute disasters include bushfires, floods, extreme hailstorms, and cyclones. But they don't include the chronic or prolonged disasters such as drought and coastal erosion. The CSIRO report noted that there has been enormous progress over many years, informed not just by Royal Commissions and inquiries, but also by a huge body of research. Research driven for nearly the past 20 years by the Bushfire and Natural Hazard CRC and its predecessor. Research driven by our universities and government research agencies. Research driven in response to the needs of the members of AFAC. But at the risk of sounding like a broken record, repeating the mantra of past chief scientists, we must do more. We need to continue to invest heavily in climate and natural disaster research because our circumstances in Australia continue to evolve, be they community expectations, the siting of buildings and infrastructure, the construction materials used, or our unique and evolving climate. As the CSIRO report said, we need to build back better. Resilience needs to be embedded as an explicit consideration in all future planning for agricultural and urban land use and zoning and investment decisions. Earlier this year, the Minister for Industry, Science and Technology, Karen Andrews, asked me to develop a mapping report of Australia's bushfire research and technology capabilities. My office and we consulted widely. And through that, we confirmed that Australia is internationally recognised for its bushfire-related research. Bibliometric analysis indicates that Australian research ranks second in the world in terms of publications, with particular strengths in fire ecology, health impacts, prescribed burning, and modelling and predicting fire behaviour. Further, Australian research into engagement with communities on bushfire preparation is very highly regarded, with operational agencies taking a key role in setting the agenda for research and translating it into practice. And no surprise, our report found that technology is key. Next generation technologies, such as software that can simulate bushfires in different weather conditions, fire histories, vegetation, or fuel loads. The CSIRO report notes that there is no nationally consistent operational bushfire model, and it identifies an emerging model named Spark as the most future-proof fire behaviour modelling platform. The report recommends that Spark's ongoing development be centrally resourced to embrace new technologies such as artificial intelligence for real-time prediction. Other recommendations include more sophisticated satellite and aircraft-mounted observation technology to see through the smoke and cloud, domestic production of firefighting foams and gels and retardants, more research into the complex area of hazard reduction, including cultural burning, improved building standards for new properties, and supporting the mental health of first responders and community members. Of course, today's research base and capability is a big step up on what we had in 1939, when the Royal Commission sadly concluded that much of the evidence was quite false and little of it was wholly truthful. Today, our researchers have a wealth of reliable bushfire-related data that is open to scrutiny and cross-checking and available to inform future research. And technological advances available now are beyond anything imaginable in the 1930s. Cumulatively, our research translated into action is having a significant impact. And we are learning. Consider this. The 2 million hectares burned in the bushfires of 1939 are dwarfed in comparison to the more than 17 million hectares lost during our recent Black Summer. And yet, deaths directly linked to our recent Black Summer bushfires are fewer than half of those in 1939. Of course, any bushfire-related death is a tragedy. Technological advancements are ensuring that these tragedies are not more prevalent. The life cycle of managing climate and disaster resilience can be characterised by three things. First, planning and preparation. Second, the immediate response and recovery. And finally, the application of our learnings to build further resilience. As noted in the CSIRO report, we constantly need to do more to understand the future risks and to plan for them. As such, I was delighted that just last month, the government committed nearly $90 million to scale up funding for critical research into bushfires and natural hazards through a new world-class research centre. building, of course, on the foundation of the Bushfire and Natural Hazards CRC. So far, I've been talking about adaptation. Now, let's talk about reducing the scope of the problem in the first place. As I mentioned at the start of my speech, we also need mitigation. And for that, we must dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Here too, the government has signalled its intent to reduce emissions, taking a technology-driven approach. To that end, in February, I was asked by the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction, Angus Taylor, to chair a ministerial reference panel to advise him in the development of Australia's first annual low emissions technology statement, coming soon to a website near you. Our approach is to build on our research base and our comparative advantages to lead the development and adoption of low emissions technologies across the economy, in industry, in agriculture, in the built environment, in transport, and in electricity generation, with the goal of enabling their deployment at scale so that they will be cost competitive with the high emissions incumbents. The low emissions statement will set out a pathway for researchers, investors, and policymakers to advance and learn together, to make space for discussion within the wider ecosystem in which policy is developed, and to foster a mutual understanding and respect for each other. Which leads me to the broader question of how science is informing public policy. It is, of course, a difficult balance. Scientific input does not automatically lead to a particular policy approach. There are always other considerations, such as, is it realistic? Will it be supported by the community? Can we afford it? Now, that doesn't mean that scientific evidence is any less important. It just means that it will be one of several inputs, a key one, taken into account by policymakers. To compete with the other inputs, science has to put its best foot forward, which means building on the existing expertise, using open lines of communication. Indeed, as I reflect on my time as Australia's chief scientist, the special ingredient across all projects I have undertaken has been broad and deep consultation. Consultation with the research community, with investors, with industry, and also with the government ministers and policy advisors for whom a report is intended. Taking their opinion into account does not compromise independence. The independence of a report comes from the courage and the experience of the chair and the panel members. Every time we go through a round of consultation, I come out wiser. Now, as it happens, I learned the importance of consultation for policy development when I attended a workshop in 2009 chaired by none other than Laurie Hammond. The purpose of the workshop was to guide the planning for a proposed Commonwealth Commercialisation Institute, which was effectively the conceptual forerunner to today's Accelerating Commercialisation Program and the whole of government advisory board known as Innovation and Science Australia. I vividly recall the superb way that Laurie stood at the front of the room and coaxed opinions and experiences from us. It was consultation done artfully. And Katherine Woodthorpe, you were in the planning workshop too, and I'm sure you will agree. I would also like to take this moment to step sideways and acknowledge the contribution of another master of the dark arts of consultation and collaboration, Dr. Tony Peacock, who recently announced his retirement as CEO of the Cooperative Research Centres Association. Tony, with his wry and dry-witted style, has made a huge contribution to the association and its support for the CRC program and the Australian businesses involved. And like Laurie, Tony is a practitioner of consultation and transparency. This is the approach that will feed our success in future research into bushfires and natural disasters and help us to find the best way forward in the planet-wide mission to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's been a tough year. Unprecedented bushfires, followed by devastating floods, and now the coronavirus pandemic. If we've learned anything, it's that disasters can and will happen. And even though you might have predicted them and even sounded the alarm with sometimes unsettling accuracy, they still seem to surprise us every time they arrive. We don't know what might come next, but we do know that we must adapt and we must mitigate. We do these things best when we invest in research, when we invest in technology, when we consult widely and inclusively, and when we come together across state borders to share what we know. In this, our National Science Week, and as Australia's Chief Scientist, I am honoured to have been able to continue the legacy of Laurie Hammond through this oration. The work of the Australian research community is vital. It delivers the goods. May the force be with you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alan. If you wouldn't mind me asking you a couple of questions, just to pick up on some of the threads that you deftly wove there. And maybe to pick up towards the end, much of what we're learning about natural hazards is that place-based knowledge plays an important part in understanding the whole picture. And from your perspective, I'm interested to know whether you think there's a role for citizen science and community participation in strengthening the research-formed evidence base, whether it's environmental practices, policy development, and so forth.
So, Katherine, I think there is a role, and I think there are two important roles. One is extending the reach of science. It's difficult, it's expensive to get scientists out into the field gathering data when you've got 17 million hectares of devastated land. And the citizen science community pulled out the stops and set up new programs and got out and did some research. There was a lot of work done in Malakuta in Victoria, in Kangaroo Island, looking at the damage to the ecology, to the flora and fauna, and that information was formally fed back and has been informing the greater research agenda, and that is much appreciated. The second reason why citizen science is important goes back to one of the themes of what I was talking about, which is the importance of communities that understand science, that can engage in the issue and share that discussion with the politicians who represent them. And by engaging citizen science, those people who are doing that effort, engaging that effort, they are actually seeing firsthand how the system works, how research is based on credible data, how difficult it is. They speak about it at their barbecues because they've had fun doing it. They think about it. They talk it up, and they talk ultimately to their local members, and that helps the whole agenda. We live in a world that's particularly difficult. As everybody's very aware, the respect for experts has been undermined by social media, and it's truly only through meaningful engagement that we can rise above the noise of social media and have informed, engaged debates. So let's go with citizen science.
Well, maybe that rather sort of leads me on to my next thought, which is, in order to engage citizens in science and collaboration in various ways, science communication becomes the most important tool to actually engage them, to enable them to perform usefully in that way. And to your point about the mad noise of social media and being more opinion being greater than facts, communicating the story developed through science is more critical than it ever has been. So as Australia's chief scientist, how well do you think we do in Australia in communicating our science to decision makers and those to be influenced?
So it goes up and down, that's for sure. And there's two types of communication that I think are relevant. And I'm not sure exactly which one you've got in mind, Katherine. I know you think about everything. You've probably got both. There's that normal communication to the community from the journalists and from experts. I've personally been very involved in that with my wife and others through establishing Cosmos magazine.
A wonderful magazine.
Thank you. But Cosmos magazine is not alone. There are a lot of international sources that are very credible. Cosmos is the best, but there are a lot of international sources that are credible, and there are many, many societies within Australia that try to help. It's difficult. The morass of information that comes up from the sheer numbers of social media and conspiracy theories is difficult, but we can never give up. We always have to go forward and never fight that kind of fire with return fire. We have to maintain our credibility and never sink to the levels of what you sometimes see out there. But the other form of communication that I'm currently much more engaged with and is key in my role as chief scientist is communicating the evidence of science to the policymakers. And there are two ways that I've found that are successful. There are many that I've found that are unsuccessful. I won't go through the latter. The two that have been very successful are reports. I mentioned reports. I've truly been privileged and thrilled to chair, I haven't even counted, but probably 8 or 9 or 10 major reports on behalf of the government, ranging from really science policy issues like national research facilities to the challenges of running an electricity system, or how do you maintain an ecologically compatible offshore drilling program, to the national hydrogen strategy, many, many reports. And they are all credible evidence-based reports. And they've been extremely well received by government because they're evidence-based, but also nuanced by an understanding of the audience. You can't communicate if you don't know your audience. That's why I said that when you're developing a report, it's important to engage with the people for whom the report is being written. So I've taken the approach of consulting widely, gathering the evidence, always supported by task forces drawn from the Commonwealth Public Service and sometimes from the state public services, and put that evidence together with the knowledge of who the audience is, and that's worked quite effectively. The second of two that I wanted to mention to you is something that I've been able to bring together during the COVID-19 crisis, and I hope that it will have a longer term future. It's called the Rapid Research Information Forum. And Katherine, yet again, our professional careers have intersected on that one too. The Rapid Research Information Forum brings together Australia's best scientists through the academies of science, through state chief scientists and other vehicles, and provides a short, sharp response to a single question from a government minister, such as the very first one we got back in early April. What is the likelihood that winter will increase the severity of transmission and the disease from the coronavirus, as it was known at the time? And we've done these in 10 to 14 days, knowing that our audience would be ministers and policy advisors, intelligent, well-educated, but not expert in the field. So never talking down, but not overwhelming, and provided a single answer to a single question really fast when it was a burning issue for the minister asking the question. It's been extremely effective and quite different to anything that we've done previously.
And I think one of the points at the beginning of that, you noted that people like the Academies of Science, the Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering, as most of us still know it, there's a wealth of expertise there that's just on tap, ready to be accessed. And I think a way to utilize them, like this rapid response approach that you have, has been incredibly valuable in just making sure we use all those resources.
You're right. And so we do tap into the people who are the well-published, acknowledged experts in the fields, and we can tap into the scientists, the technologists, the medical researchers, the the humanities researchers, the economics and education researchers. We bring them all together so the answer does look at the spectrum. But the other thing about those wonderful people is they want to help. They do this work pro bono. They donate their time, short, sharp, intensive, nights and weekends, 10-day period, to produce the best possible result to help inform the decision-making process.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great initiative of yours. One last one from me. When your office put together the Bushfire Research and Technologies capability, both of us referenced it earlier, were there any real surprises that came out of that in terms of either the breadth or depth of capability capacity we had here? How did we fare, do you think, globally? And some of that, were there gaps that you really think we need to...
I wasn't surprised that we do a lot of research in the area and that we do it very well. Australia's research capability is world-class. 7 of the top 100 universities on a ranking scale looking at research capability are Australian. That's well above what you'd expect on a population basis, even in developed countries. What was a bit of an eye-opener for me, and I was very pleased to see it, was the effective exchange of information, the translation of research into the community and the expression of the community's questions back to the research community. And the Bushfire and Natural Hazard CRC is a key element in that bilateral communication. There's no problem. When you're talking about something tangible like bushfires, it's not the same as thinking about gravitational waves. Gravitational waves, you're probably not going to change the planet or the outcome of a crisis in the next few years, the next few millennia. But when you're doing bushfire research, if you're not doing it with a real tangible problem in mind that needs to be solved, it's almost, what's the point? And operational agencies and intermediaries such as the Bushfire and Natural Hazard CRC have done a wonderful job in surveying the capability of the Australian research community, bringing them together in some cases, working on projects that answer the questions that need to be answered. And at the same time, reaching out to the communities, sometimes through operational agencies like the Rural Fire Services, to find out what those operational agencies need and what the communities need, and bring those questions in a packaged fashion back to the research community. So that's what was an eye-opener for me, and I was very, very pleased to see it.
I think it's a really important facet of some of the work that the CRC has done, is been melding both those, if you like, hard sciences, as most people view them, together with the social sciences, that real understanding of what both the communities are thinking, what will enable them to interact, what will enable them to actually act on advice and so forth, and actually making those as an ongoing spectrum so that there's no clear divide between them. And I think that's one of the great legacies of this CRC, and will be one of the really important things going forward with the new centre as it gets up and running. I just want to finally compliment you on your artwork as always. Alan has an interesting set of artwork behind him in these kind of discussions we have. And I'm sure you'll notice over his right shoulder that there's a particularly apposite piece of art that was nicely placed. So that was very charming of you to do that. Much appreciated.
I guess it is apropos to the topic.
It is. And it's been a critical topic for this summer, but you know, it's August. Summer is upon us and the season is upon us already in the north of Australia. So there is barely a moment to gather breath, and this winter we've had an enormous amount of work done through your work, through Minister Andrews' roundtables and the spin-off things that have come out of that, and all of that's been really important in getting us, if not better prepared for this season, certainly for future ones. So as outgoing chief scientist, you won't be with us this time next year in this capacity, I'd really like to thank you for your work as chief scientist as well as for this afternoon's oration. But thank you for everything you've done, Alan, in that role. I don't think I've seen a chief scientist with the energy that you've put into it across all those topics, not least the COVID disaster that faces the world and us today. So thank you very much. Thank you for this afternoon's oration. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions. There's been quite a plethora of them, but I think the way we teased out some of the issues at the end actually covered some of the questions that came up anyway. So I hope everyone is happy with that and feels that whatever they might like to have asked got covered off. Just to repeat, we'll have a survey coming out to all of those attendees. The more feedback you can give us, the more we can improve. So thank you, everybody. Farewell.